Sugar and Spikes is a science-backed and semi-sarcastic mental health podcast for a new type of business leader. Mental health concerns are occasionally addressed, but this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any condition, mental, physical, metaphysical, or otherwise. That's a job for your doctor or therapist, not a podcast. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
Kind of like when to share like your side hustle or your hobby with your business, like if you're not an entrepreneur or if you're still doing it on the side. Or
do you think that
something
that's
like
necessary though? Like, do you always have to disclose?
Well, that's what I'm saying, like when to do it, when not to do it, because something that a couple people have asked me about is the fact that, you know, what makes my job different to where like folks know versus
like the difference between this and that,
and when like my old boss didn't.
Oh, that's a good question.
And well, I think also it comes down to like that relational piece again also, but on top of that, like, is there like the objective pieces are, is there anything predetermined to where like the company has, well, we need to know about like X, Y, and Z?
Well,
know,
it's like what you were saying, like what's in your contract, right?
Exactly.
So our employee handbook is our contract because it explicitly addresses things like moonlighting, what dress code, like all of that.
Yeah.
So that's all in our handbook, and then we have to sign that we've read it.
Yeah.
And then we'll follow
That's your contract. Interesting.
I couldn't find anything else.
Yeah.
And they explicitly talk about moonlighting, that as long as it doesn't compete with the business that they're doing and you're not using their name. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, I'm a psychologist who works for like, then
you're not like you don't present the information as if like they're signing off on it.
Right. And I'm not like poaching clients.
Exactly. Yeah. I think there's that. And the handbook thing makes sense because I'm thinking about like all of the jobs I had beforehand, like when I was in community mental health and everything, that was kind of the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's such a big organization that I don't think that there's a way to like individually tailor contracts to everybody. Like, we're all expected to abide by the same things. But also as psychologists and other licensed professionals, I think there's more leeway in terms of how we use that degree because not that degree, the license, because as a licensed professional, you decide how to share your expertise. I don't know why I think it's different, but just in a way, it's like there are people who work for academic institutions, but also do X, Y, and Z on the side as professional. Like, well,
I think, you know what I mean? I think that's your field. Like,
yeah, my field
specific.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, like when we think about the presenters and stuff we heard this past weekend and everything, some of them were licensed in various ways. Some of them weren't, because there's licensure, there's other credentials.
Right.
Like, how many people had like letters after their name where you and I were both like, I don't know what that is. I'm sure it's really cool and you worked really hard for it.
Yeah.
Please tell me what that means. And
well, yeah, I mean, that's the whole idea that like, do the letters mean something to people or do they not? And like the thing that I think is kind of awful about that is that almost always letters behind your name mean you worked really fucking hard to get those. And it's just sad that not sad, but like, it's unfortunate that they're so industry specific so that other people can't recognize your expertise right away.
Yeah.
The way like a PhD, like even with PsyD, people are like, oh, what's that? But like, if you have a PhD, everybody knows like, you're super, super smart. You know what I mean? And you worked really hard for that. And I'm sure there are other, like I remember Kathy having like
So many letters.
And it all represented a lot of hard work, but I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah.
Like, she had a master's in pharmacy. Like,
which is harder than I would say half the PhDs out there.
Right?
Like
she has that. She has a master's in addiction counseling. She had her CADC 3, and she has a PhD.
Yeah.
And look at Genevieve.
Didn't she have a PhD as well?
No, I think she had a PhD.
Okay.
And then Genevieve has a PhD in engineering and a PsyD.
I think sometimes those... It's maybe a saucy thing to say. Sometimes when you see people with that many groups of letters behind their name, I think we're talking a little bit about academic addiction.
Maybe.
Like this is the world I know and I'm going to continue doing that. Because when you play out the years to get all of those letters, then it's essentially like, yeah, there's professional development and job stuff in there, but it's going from one degree to the next.
True.
You know, and I don't mean it in like a negative way, but almost like academic familiarity.
That's true. Like, once you know what you're doing, you do it.
Kind of like keep doing that.
Kind of like once you read Shakespeare and you're kind of like into the mode of how to read it, you just keep going.
Yeah.
Just play after play after play, because otherwise you have to like get back into like how he words things and what that means. It's like this whole other language you have to speak, right? So like I used to do that when I was in high school. Like, once I started Shakespeare, I would do a bunch in a row because I was kind of in that mindset.
That makes sense. And I think, but like that's the same for so many things, right? Like, once you know something well, you hold on to that, and there's this immediate, not defense, but like hesitancy to stay in that lane.
Yeah, because people can't manage their ambiguity.
Exactly.
Nobody can.
Like, not to pick on you or like anything, but like using your experience at Finn Found Her as an example, where there was this level of anxiety at the start where like, I don't belong in this world, XYZ. You can speak to that if you want, so I'm not putting words in your mouth. But then by the end, it was a bit more comfortable, but that was after 16 plus direct hours of essentially tunnel vision.
Right.
You know?
Well, I mean, I was thinking about that, right? And I was thinking, like, I think the thing that I took away from Finn Found Her that has stayed with me is, and I think is really important, is this idea of challenging your biases, because like challenging biases and thinking about things in a whole new way, for me, that's kind of, this is gonna sound stupid, but like this life-changing event, because we have our viewpoint and we only have ours. So when you have a chance to be like, oh, I wasn't thinking about that right, and it like fundamentally changes how you go about life from then on, like that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And that, I think, for me was the most valuable thing that I took away, besides like some of the very concrete things that I thought was very helpful, was just like, oh, I wasn't thinking about this right.
Yeah.
And now I feel like I'm thinking about it in a whole new way and it helped me make more sense of it. And like, I don't know, but I mean, that's kind of what therapy is, right?
Yeah.
You're paying for like shifting your viewpoint or your point of view. So like, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I'm making any sense.
Well, I think it's this awareness around challenging your assumptions.
Right.
You know, because one thing that I thought was really interesting, and you didn't directly say this or explicitly say this, but this idea of like, well, how am I going to connect with this group of people, you know? But then come to find out later, there was someone that was like not funding, but like working on a project for like crisis de-escalation.
Right.
And I messaged you and I was like, would have been great to talk to this person, but like the assumptions there were, this is business, I don't belong in this world, I'm not going to connect with people. But then breaking it down, well, I mean, one thing that I feel like I always say is like, everything's a business, so it's not like there is still a chance that like any other interest you have is going to overlap. But where was I going with this? Like the assumption that there wasn't going to be a connection, and then because of that, it was almost-ish a self-fulfilling prophecy
Right.
in the lack of connections made, and then, oh, if we would have known.
Well, yeah, of course. But like, I also tend to run super, super anxious. And like it takes me a little bit to feel comfortable anywhere. And because I was kind of helping, but I wasn't really with you know what I mean? I was kind of caught in no man's land a little bit.
Yeah, which was kind of my fault because we could have like had a conversation around where there was a media partner. Like I could have given you a bit more language to have felt more involved, like media partner, sponsor, like whatever. So then you could have said that.
Right.
So
we live and learn, right?
My bad.
Live and learn.
Next time you'll know exactly what to say.
I know, right? Because I'm licensed. I tell you, when they finally sent that, I was like, about time.
Yeah. Oh, I was like, thank God. Like, I think everyone in the universe was just like, okay, because it took significantly longer than most people have to go through.
Most people, it takes like 2 weeks.
Yeah, it was like
it took 2 months.
Yeah,
2 months, and like, oh, so annoying.
Mm-hmm.
But like, when we had a very, very robust plan for getting the new updated form to the board. Like, I was going to have my boss sign it. And originally we thought she wasn't going to be there. We thought she was going to be somewhere else. So I was going to write it. Pascal was going to come pick it up. He was going to take it to her. She was going to sign it. We were going to give it to my dad. And then my dad was going to overnight UPS it with a tracking number. And then, so it's kind of like, okay, if you're going to go through all of that, here you go.
Yeah.
Whereas before it's like, oh, we didn't get the form. Oh, these aren't filled out right, but I'm not going to tell you that. I'm just going to send you some nasty email.
Yeah.
Like, ugh.
It was a shit show.
God, it was too. On a level that is like not typical,
Yeah.
But it's done.
Yep.
And it's anticlimactic as like most huge accomplishments end up being.
Well, like there's always something else, which I don't know why, but like that concept, it's something that I know really well because you and I have talked about this in terms of like feeling like we're settled. Like there's always something else where things aren't just right. But then with this, like, that's kind of a subjective stance. Like, there's always something until everything feels good.
Well, yeah, because you're always learning and growing, right?
Yeah.
Like, nothing just stays the same.
Yeah. But I think about, like, in terms of, like, life situations and feeling like I have my shit together almost. Yeah. Like, that's somewhat subjective.
It is. That's true.
But, like, with yours and I think, like, just, like, professionally on a larger scale, there is always something else to do. Like with your licensure, there were other things like getting paneled and stuff like that. And
yeah, it didn't stop.
With work, and I think whether you're running a department, running a business, anything like that.
But yeah, because like ever since we started grad school, it's like, okay, I got through first year. Now I need to get a practicum placement, which you have to interview for, and is super high stress.
Yeah.
Then you get Prac 1, and then you're like, oh my God, I have to see clients for the first time. And that's terrifying. And then it's like, okay, you kind of get some time under your belt, and then you're like, okay, but now I have to get a Prac 2. But if I don't get a good one, right? And you have to interview for that too. And you're worried about hours like the whole time, constantly. And then you get through Prac 2, and then you're like, okay, now I got my master's, but okay. And then now you're in clinical field work, you're applying for internship, and you have to finish your comps, right? So all of that happens, but then you're like, oh, what if I don't get any internship interviews? And then you have to go on the interviews, and then you have to match, and then you have to make it through internship. Then you get your degree, but you're not really done because you have to pass the EPPP, then you have to make sure you have enough hours, then you have to do all the paperwork for licensure, then you have to get paneled, then it just like never ends.
Mm-hmm.
So like, even when I graduated and they're like, oh yeah, that's a huge accomplishment. I'm like, yeah, but not really, because I'm just doing the same job I was doing before.
Do you think so? Like, I've had the same like experience with frustration of, well, there's always something else like on one level or another.
Yeah.
Do you think that it boils down to we need to shift our expectations of what, like, I don't know, life, business, whatever you want to call it, what that holds and entails? Because I feel like it's this continuous running of a marathon that never ends, and we expect to hit the like end tape without realizing each mile was like a sort of.
So one of the speakers at FinFounders said it's really important to celebrate positive milestones.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes, like with my situation, I didn't feel like I could celebrate those milestones because there was always something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, I'm like, oh, that doesn't matter because I still have to do this,
Mm-hmm.
which is like the ultimate like mind fuck if you really think about it.
Yeah.
Like, that was a lot of milestones to hit, and I can tell you, I didn't celebrate any of them.
Yeah.
At all.
Well, and I know, like, with your situation, and especially for entrepreneurs and founders and, you know, folks in that position, so much of it is, well, my livelihood depends on it. So I can't let up because, yeah, there's a bit of safety now, but what about this next piece?
Yeah.
And I think that's where awareness kind of comes into play, and these kind of like small check-ins, however you want to do them, but kind of challenging those leaps, like in terms of, I think about celebrating your milestones that you've had, where it's okay, this is done, but then the pressure is, but this has to come next, or else I don't get X, Y, and Z. Like, I don't get this check. But if we were to play that out and pause in the moment of, well, this is done, then the like everything's at stake. Like well, I have to keep a roof over my head, I have to feed my family, stuff like that. In the moment, you're in this position, and a lot of times for entrepreneurs, like in the moment, things are covered. Like the rent is paid, or like there is next month. I'm not saying all the time, but a lot of the time.
Well, even if it's not, like what would fundamentally change about your journey if you were to stop and be like, in my case, I can only speak for myself, hey, you just got a doctorate. That's a big deal. And I'm like, because I distinctly remember saying, it's not a big deal because it's meaningless. I'm still doing the same thing I was doing before. But that would not have changed whether or not I celebrated it. I probably just would have felt a lot better about saying like, you know what? No, that was a big deal. And I'm going to take a minute and really reflect on my 9 years of work to get there. Right?
Yeah.
Because you and I have even talked about how degrees, and I mean, we were just talking about this earlier, degrees and letters behind your name represent a shit ton of work. Like, and sacrifice and time spent away from things to do other things, right?
And to not like exile a part of the audience, we'll say degrees, letters, and titles.
Yeah.
Like,
titles do too, I agree.
We've joked around about like title protection and stuff, but you know, there is a language behind titles and level of titles, like an administrator versus a manager versus a director, things like that.
That's a great point.
Yes, there's no licensing board, but those titles mean things, especially to your industry and to your professional community. So whatever title you're carrying, like that shows work as well.
Right, because it also shows like a track, right? Like, I mean, that probably meant sacrifice too, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not for 1 second suggesting that somehow because I have an academic degree that I have put in more work than somebody who has been on a more promotion, active, working, focused track.
Yeah.
I think there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into that. And like, even as an entrepreneur, even if you don't have anything behind your name, even just to say like, I have a successful business, to be able to say those words also represents huge amounts of work and sacrifice and like ability to be flexible and adapt to situations, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can only speak for my own self.
No, I'm not saying you were saying that. I wanted to clearly connect the dots just in case there was someone that was like, well,
I don't have letters.
I didn't graduate college, but I have this like amazing business, but now I feel bad. Like, I don't want to like marginalize.
Don't feel bad. It's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, like, I just think sometimes we don't stop to like say, hey, that was a big deal. You know?
Yeah. And I think it also kind of comes down to personality type.
Oh, yeah.
Because the people that are broad brushstrokes, guys, all right? Just bear with me while I paint this ridiculously kindergarten level picture.
Generalized picture.
The people that tend to be successful are generally, notice all the padding, like type A overachievers. And we don't.
And if we were in class, it would be like, discuss.
Well, it would be like my 99% isn't the 101 that someone got because somehow they scrounged up extra credit because they saw a typo in the textbook, so this is bullshit.
Right.
You know, like, but play that out into the real world, you're still doing like crazy things.
Yeah.
But we often come from households where we were pushed and not given space, and now I'm getting really processy, but not given space to learn how to appreciate. I don't think that culture for the last 50 years or so, longer if we get into like who started the states, we don't teach ourselves to appreciate the stepping stones that build the staircase.
No.
Like that's what it comes down to.
I can absolutely tell you the way I was raised, you don't celebrate fucking anything.
Yeah.
If you're not at the goal, it doesn't fucking matter.
But then the goal's always moving.
Right.
So then nothing matters.
Right.
Yeah.
That is exactly the way, the messages that I got.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're always after the goal. And once you get to the goal, there's another goal. So fuck that goal. You don't even celebrate that. You just keep going. And you don't take time off. And you don't be sick. You come in. Work comes first all the time. Like,
yeah,
that's how I was raised. So, like, how do I learn how to undo that? Right? It's hard to undo things that you learned. It's possible. Like, therapy, like, somebody said to me once, like, well, don't you think change is possible? And I'm like, of course I think it's possible. Otherwise, what the fuck am I doing?
Yeah.
Like, I'm a fucking fraud if I don't think change is possible. Of course change is possible. Do I think it's easy? No, I don't. I think it takes a lot of work. And I think it's not absolute, right? We always think of everything going forward in a straight line. It's just like, you know how some cultures are taught that like things are more circular or like the studies that are like the way you think about things is the way like your language is constructed. Like if there's 85 words for one type of thing, you're going to have a more nuanced understanding than someone from a culture where there's one word for one thing.
Well, we've talked about that with feelings.
Right.
Yeah.
Like frustrated, sad, right? Versus all the
I'm
others.
mad.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel vulnerable. I feel hurt. I feel this, that, right? So like, I forget what I was saying.
Well, the way language is constructed and
forms your worldview, right? So at least the way I was taught, change goes in a straight line, right? Because like U.S. mainstream culture tends to be like think in straight lines.
If you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards.
Right. So straight lines.
Fuck side to side.
Right.
Yeah.
Or circular. Right. So like you're always going forward.
No.
And you never get to a point where you stop because you just move the benchmark straight ahead. But it's not straight ahead. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was talking about why I think change is possible.
Right.
So I think change is possible, but it doesn't go in a straight line. And I think that that is a hard thing to really accept. I have trouble accepting it, like as a personal person, not as like a therapist or anything, but as like a person, that like if I set my mind at something, it isn't going to automatically happen, and there's going to be setbacks along the way. There's going to be times when I change my strategies or go back to the ones that I knew before, and like it just doesn't work that way. So I don't know. So if you're raised that way, it makes it hard to appreciate, right?
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes to feel like you're making progress if you're not going in a straight line.
Yeah. I mean,
it really takes looking in reverse and seeing like, well, where did I start? And where am I now?
Yeah.
Am I where I started? Am I worse off from where I started? Am I better off from where I started? And that's the only way you can really, well, not the only way, but a main way that you can evaluate progress. And it's very different to think like, am I getting to where I'm going? If I'm not there yet, I consider that all a failure, right? All or nothing thinking. If I started at A and I'm trying to get to B and I'm not at B, well, then fuck it. I failed. I'm not doing it. But if you look at it in reverse, where you're like, well, I started at A and I'm not at B, but I'm definitely not at A anymore, that is advancement and progress and, you know, worthy of milestone celebration and like all of that, right?
Yeah. That made me think of a quote. So I was looking at pictures from last year's Spin Founder, and there's this quote that was on one of the slides that ties directly to this.
Oh.
I think.
Okay.
Backing up is not the same as backing down.
Yeah.
Like having to take a couple steps back isn't like when you take those couple of steps back, you do so with new knowledge.
Right.
You know,
you're
like,
not who you were.
Exactly. But we don't think about it like that.
No, we don't. Because our cultural framework is straight lines and all or nothing thinking. Right? So taking steps back is failure equals failure when really it doesn't.
No.
Right? It's like, okay, I have to back up. But truly, when you back up, you're not even 2 steps really back in reverse because you're not who you were. You have more knowledge. You're not really where you were at before. So it's kind of this whole mind fuck all the time.
Yeah.
Of like, I'm backing up. No, what? But really you're not. But the way we think about it, it's impossible not to feel that way almost. It takes a lot of work to undo that.
Well, and I think about it in terms of habits. I was reading Reddit for something. I went down the rabbit hole of the internet the other night. And
I've been known to do that.
And this person was talking about giving up like a habit.
Oh.
And they said you know, really every time you choose not to do it, it's leveling up because that situation in itself was like, if you think about it in terms of like video games, that was a specific level. And so when you choose to not do that, you've passed that level. But then if you do, like if like things change and you do like take that step back, then you're not playing the same level. It's a different level with tweaks. You know, like if you think about World of Warcraft, things like that, like the battles, they're not 100% the same.
Yeah. Because you have different statistics.
Exactly. And I thought that was really interesting. Like it's not a failure, it's a do-over. You've learned a bit, but things are also going to be a bit different.
Right.
You know.
Because also when you play levels over, you do them better because you know, oh, don't go over there because
But then you see things that you may not have seen before.
Right.
Where like, sure, you get past this one thing, but oh, there was something else coming right at you.
Yeah.
Or if you're playing live, then that's a whole different thing. So I think I thought that take was really, I found it fascinating. This neutral stance of it's not a failure, it's like a do-over with other insights.
Well, it's a reframe, right? But not just like, oh, I'm just reframing it with positive words, like, because we talked about that, like this idea of toxic positivity.
Yeah.
But the way you learn is from doing things incorrectly. I mean, think about the people who like flew through high school, never had to try, never had anything go wrong, had like this cushy life. And then they get to college and they fall flat on their face because they're not adaptable. They don't have flexible problem solving. They don't have any experience to lean on. And so like, they're just like, fuck, what? This is really hard because they didn't have enough adversity earlier in their life because school came easy or whatever reason, that you can't develop those skills if you do one way, and one way has always worked.
Yeah.
You never ever develop alternate ways of being nimble and agile and all of that. So like the shitty thing about learning is learning comes from failure. Like, oh, don't do that again. Do it this way.
Yeah.
Or, oh, not quite that way, but some combination of the two.
Well, it's muscle growth, right? Like, you don't grow muscles without breaking some down.
Right. You know, you're just going to have to post this as like tales of whatever.
I know.
Sugar and Spike's rambling.
This is a test.
Right?
I think it's good, though.
The musings of.
I know. I'm trying to think of the through line. There's definitely a through line.
Oh, of course there is.
I just need to pinpoint it and bring it around.
Did you listen to the one we did at Finfounter? How was it?
It was good.
Yeah?
Yeah. I was right. Dean said that we were much quieter than we normally are.
Oh, yeah.
He was like, and then like after you thought that like someone was there or something, then you got even more quiet. So I had to like play with the levels, and I was like, yeah, it was an experience.
We were definitely talking quieter. Well, I was very aware after you said something that they were like right on the other side of a partition.
I couldn't let go of that.
Yeah.
Like it was a really hard moment for me.
I know. I know.
But I mean, I think, okay, let's play this out, right? At the start of this, we were talking about like lesson learned. Now we know. I would say that's kind of the through line.
Yeah.
Even with, I mean, if we go back even a few minutes earlier, what's different between how I present what I do to my current company.
Oh, yeah.
Versus.
That's how we started.
That's kind of how this started. I mean, both are lessons learned. So let's break it down. I'll go first and I'll talk about like my lessons learned.
Okay.
Taking it, God, all the way back, if you remember how this started, we opened with the question of why show your work.
Yeah.
Kind of with, being a bit more open with current employers and
how to know when that's a good idea.
How to know when it's a good idea. And I mean, I guess the first thing is like it is very much relational, which is something that we've talked about, but in the sense that the folks I'm working with now have known about this since before Sugar and Spikes was a thing, when Tammy and I were operating under something completely different. And we've talked about like the rebranding and stuff multiple times on different episodes.
Because we've learned.
Yeah.
And so we're like doing over with more experience.
Yeah. But they've known about like whatever this adventure is from the start, and really they were a part of the inspiration behind it. You know?
Oh yeah, that's right. They totally were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that.
So mad props, you know who you are.
And it comes up more because the thing that I will say with my other employer was, honestly, it never came up.
Right.
You know, like, I keep going back to, like, I didn't hide it, but I wasn't like, hey, guess what I did? Because it wasn't connected. There was no connection.
Yeah.
And now with like Sugar and Spikes and Finn Found Her, like, there's this like organic overlap.
Right.
Not overlap, but like natural connection, like what we talked about in the last episode. Like anyways, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And I keep going back to like with my other employer, like I wasn't hiding it, and like I told them at one point, I was like, I'm not being secretive. I was in Huffington Post. Like, it's kind of, I mean,
like, surprise. Okay. If you had a Google alert for my name, it would have come up because I have a Google alert for your name.
I mean, I know it. I keep Google alerts for so many of like my friends and connections because I like to know what they're doing, and it's an easy way to be aware and, you know, give folks props. Anyways, Google alerts, not weird, highly beneficial. So that's the thing. And objectively speaking, like we talked about at the beginning, what's in your contract, what's in your employee handbook. I don't think in prior job there was no contract, so I could kind of get away. I don't want to say get away with, but I could do whatever I wanted and it was fine.
Yeah.
And in this one there's nothing specifically about.
Well, I think so from my point of view, like, you want to be ethical about it, right? So like if there is something prohibiting it in a contract that you signed, like, you need to think about your choices and what you're going to do.
Yeah. Because I know there are a lot of companies where, like, in the handbook and I guess contract or whatever, like, there are social media rules and there are active, like, media guidelines.
Right.
And things.
Yeah.
Those are, like, crazy large companies where it makes sense.
But also read what you're signing.
Yeah. know what you're signing up for, know what you're agreeing to, and then have a conversation about it.
Right.
You know,
like, oh, I saw that this says this. Well, I'm doing this. How do you feel about that? Blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
Like, that's that authenticity and assertiveness and being upfront, right? Which is important in establishing trust.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So, I mean, really, from one job to the next, I don't know what this person was trying to do. Like, they were trying to call me out, or maybe they were actually like interested, but I read it with a interesting tone. Anyways, I don't know what the goal was. I don't know if I've answered that question, but that's the long and short of it.
It depends. That's the long and short of it.
I was literally gonna say it depends on the situation.
Doesn't everything? Like I hate that we can't give certainty, because certainty is so, like, relaxing.
Well, it's that one-way road, right?
Yeah,
like with certainty, I keep going forward.
Right. And so, like, certainty is so comforting, and yet we essentially say there's really no certainty. You got to live with and be able to tolerate a certain amount of, like, it's not set in stone.
Well, and there are facts that you can use to help, like, guide the ambiguity and guide your direction. Like,
but it's a framework. It's not steps. It's like,
what do you look at? What do you think about?
Well, it's just like that question when we talked about metrics. Like, well, what are metrics for businesses? I'm like, well, what does your business do?
Exactly.
Like, there isn't some sort of, like, set, like, use these 5 metrics. It's just a framework of have metrics.
Yeah.
And then you have to figure out the specifics of that and what those are. So, I mean, in some ways, it makes me feel bad on a certain level to be able to say, like, hey, it's not really certain. And on the other hand, it's like, here's how you can deal with that and how you have to grow as a person to be able to live with ambiguity, which is really hard. It just is. It's difficult because it creates a certain amount of low-level anxiety that you kind of feel all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's 100% a double-edged sword because there is the ambiguity. There's also the freedom in, well, we get to decide. You get to decide. You know? And then there's this middle ground, especially for folks that are building like their corporate career, where yes, there are guidelines and what else defines your success. Like, yes, you get success at work, but also we know that, as we were just talking about, that's not always fulfilling. So defining your own other types of success.
Yeah.
So.
Well, even like leadership, I remember when I was studying for the HPP, I'm like, oh my God, why are there so many theories of leadership? Like, this is crazy. It's like too many.
Well, because there are different types of leadership.
Right. You know what I mean?
Says the girl that studied leadership for 2 years.
Right?
I'm like, well, sit down.
I particularly remember coming to you and I'm like, I'm studying like IO right now. And I don't understand why there's all these theories for like one thing.
I'm like, get your popcorn.
I know, right? So because there's so many variables and so many ways to do it, that there's a lot of theories that can fit whatever road you're going down
and what you're looking to accomplish. Like, one leader may want to increase like output of a team, the other may want to
wants to increase autonomy of team members.
Yeah.
Right, because you have like the task-oriented leader and you have like the more relationship-oriented leader, and they're good in different situations. And so, yeah. So that is all to say, right? It's complicated.
Yeah.
And because there's so many different ways you can approach things, there's different theories and steps you can take along the way, but they also don't follow like a specific formula, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do I lead? Well, what kind of leader are you?
Yeah. Who or what are you looking to lead?
Right. I don't know. I just need the 5 steps of leadership. And I'm like, it's not really that simple. So, as all things in life, it's simple and complicated at the same time. Yeah. And so, live in that ambiguity too. Like, it's kind of a mindfuck all the time.
Yeah.
Because certainty feels so good. You're like, nope, I'm certain of this.
Yeah.
Right? And then you come to find out with some perspective shift, that wasn't a totally accurate belief.
And it's the trial and error that gives you the perspective. Like, bringing it back to like lessons learned and everything.
Yeah.
Like, the only way, I don't want to say the only way, but like the way that's going to affect you the most is if you try and either it's a success or it doesn't work out.
Yeah, like what do you learn from your experiences?
Exactly.
Like that person who has one strategy, like you know what I mean? Like the nail and hammer analogy that everybody uses, but whatever. I'm not going to say it because it's like a platitude, but you get the point. Like if you only have one way, you have certainty, and yet you may not achieve what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. I mean, it could be helpful. It could not.
Yeah. Again, it depends.
Speaking of learning from experiences and everything, I shared mine. What lessons have you learned from your FinFounders experience?
What did I learn?
Yeah. To round out this grab bag of an episode.
What did I learn? I learned that my perspective was not totally accurate, and that there is a place for people who think the way I think in business, and that there's no one size fits all, and to find mentors to lean on, like advisors, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Like you can go your own way, and you don't have to totally go your own way. And
what would you...
Big broad strokes, right?
What would you do differently?
Like from here forward?
Yeah. Because, like, I think about, like, so for example, like, I think about, like, the situation that we've been using for my example. And I would say what I learned, if we were to hold all things equal.
Yeah.
Which is hard to do.
You control for things.
Yeah. If you control for things, I would say the biggest lesson in between the situations is to ask and to have clear communication.
Open dialogue.
And that's one thing that I will say, like, I've been very intentional about, like, well, what do you think of X, Y, and Z, like, in speaking with folks that I work with.
Yeah.
So I would say that, yeah, all things equal, communication would be the lesson that I learned from my prior experience.
I think if you think about all things equal, then I learned that, especially in business, you just can't be tied into one way of thinking, because you have to be agile with the market and you have to be able to adapt, or you become obsolete, aka Borders books.
Which is interesting because that's what we talk about on every single episode is ambiguity, which is essentially agility. Like it's navigating the changing demands.
But I also believe that I don't know everything, right? Like, and that's why I say, like, the most valuable thing I got was this change in perspective, that challenged some of my biases, because I don't know everything. And there are other ways to look at the same thing and to come to different conclusions.
Yeah.
And so it's important not to be on an island and recognize that one way forever isn't going to work. That's a certainty for me. That you have to be a quote unquote lifelong learner now, whatever that means, right? But this idea that you have to learn new things and be open to change and be open to hearing things you may not like. I remember sitting in like the panel discussions and hearing people say, like, time after time, like, I don't care how good the idea is. If I'm working with someone who can't be taught, who won't take advice, who can't change the way they're looking at something or get off the road they're on, I don't want to touch it. Because even if it can be successful, I don't know if it can be. Because I can't teach these people anything. And I'm like, right, so you have to be open.
Yeah.
And that can be really hard to do. Right? It can be hard to be open with this thing. I remember what somebody else said was like, to like VCs, it doesn't carry the same weight and risk as somebody who's invested their entire life savings, all of their time, right? Like the stakes are different.
Yeah.
And I think when the stakes are high, it's really hard to be open, because you're like, what if that doesn't work? And you can't. I think it would be hard to live with that uncertainty versus I'm doing it this way so far and it seems to be working and I'm doing it my way because I have more at stake. And so I think being open and learning from others is really important. You know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That makes sense.
Yeah. You look like you're like, that is not very satisfying.
No. I'm sorry that this is my face.
Change your face.
Honestly, I just remembered that there's cake.
Oh, there is cake. I want cake.
So that's a great tangent. Let's wrap it up.
Cake.
Yeah. Okay, bye.
Bye, friends.